Today we are looking at a topic that might not seem as if it's a thing of God's, and yet it shows up in Mark's gospel over and over again. The topic, food. Yes, Jesus and food, believe it or not. There in the gospel, with all of the miracles and healings and teachings that would alter the world for millennia to come, is also a Jesus whose story is told through meals. This is not conjecture. In your hand, if you've downloaded it, you have a study guide that's filled front and back with passages about this topic. And as challenging as it might sound today, if we are wanting to live lives that look more like the life of Jesus Christ, then we must also look at this topic with the same fervency that we do everything else in the gospel stories. If you take a quick pass through the stories on your study guides with me for a second, we see a few different things emerging in the many meals of Jesus. Number one, we see that Jesus ate with people that other people detested. Jesus ate with people that other people detested. The text calls them tax collectors and sinners. And yes, those things are worded together as a bit of an extra jab toward tax collectors. Tax collectors in the culture being spoken of here were thought of as traitors to the Jewish people. The tax collectors were Jewish men employed by the Romans to collect taxes from the Jewish people. In other words, the tax collectors were collecting money from the oppressed to finance the oppressors. So there was just about nothing worse than being a tax collector. Each of the tax collectors knew what they were doing, and they were getting rich doing it. This is why they are singled out here along with the generic label sinners. And guess what? Jesus ate meals with them. And in doing so, in this particular case, in this particular gospel story, a man named Levi, which is Hebrew for Matthew, decides to leave his life as a tax collector. And he begins following Jesus. And then much later has a gospel penned in his own name. Think about that for a second. That's something kind of important. The reason that we have a gospel called Matthew at all is because Jesus ate a meal with someone that other people despised. Number two, in these stories, we see that Jesus didn't want anyone to go hungry. In chapters 6 and 8, Jesus feeds a total of 9,000 people who don't have anything to eat and are in need of food. He performs a miracle, multiplying a few loaves of bread and a few fish, and everyone eats their fill. There are even leftovers. The passage is also clear to point out that Jesus did this out of his compassion for them, because they were to him like a sheep without a shepherd. And then finally, number three in the stories, we see that Jesus has a Last Supper with his disciples before he is betrayed and crucified. We remember this meal every Sunday here in our worship in the time that we call communion, the Eucharist, or the Lord's Supper. And it's easy to forget the significance of this thing that we do every Sunday. Over the years, unfortunately, the sacrament of communion has been codified by the church into something that we do to get right with God, or to be cleansed of our wrongdoing, or to show that we're really serious about this. I've never understood how we've got there when the very meal we're remembering is also served to someone who was deliberately plotting and planning to betray Jesus. What's my point? Jesus also sat and ate a meal with his friends, and his enemy. These are the things that we see in the meals of the life of Jesus Christ. Ergo, if we want to be like Jesus, we must allow ourselves to be challenged by these ideas. Ideas that are deeply at odds with the world's past and current trends, where we only eat with people who boost our social status. A world where a person earns their food or they starve. And a world where we never sit down for a meal with our enemies, only our friends. Imagine what our world could slowly become if we just thought of meals the way that Jesus did. If you're taking notes today, I want you to write this down. This is what I would hope you would remember from this lesson today. Jesus thought of meals as opportunities for inclusion, compassion, and grace. Jesus ate with sinners. Jesus fed the hungry. Jesus invited his enemies to a table with his friends. Jesus thought of meals as opportunities for inclusion, compassion, and grace. Strangely enough, with this topic, I found myself thinking a lot about the season in my life where I went through a divorce. To quote from the scriptures, God hates divorce. And that is valid. And anyone who's been through a divorce will testify to the truth of that passage. I hate divorce too. I hate that I am divorced too. And anyone who has been through a divorce hates it too. It is a terrible, awful experience that is beyond words. Anyway, in the season of my divorce, I noticed almost immediately that longtime friends that my spouse and I had had as a couple started to take sides. Some of them, I'm sure, were malicious in their intent, but I don't think that most of them were. It's just one of the many reasons why a divorce is awful and complicated. And so all of a sudden, people that used to text me or call me on a regular basis just stopped. They disappeared from my life as if almost overnight. It got even more complicated with extended family relationships like cousins and aunts and uncles. Divorce is also difficult, as anyone knows who has been through it, financially. I remember so many nights where I would be driving to Pennsylvania to be with my children, and I had nowhere for us to stay. And I'd be on my phone trying to figure something out, and then out of the blue in that very moment, some random friend from some long past experience would text me and say something like, "Hey, where are you staying while you're here in Pennsylvania? Come have dinner with us. We also made up the guest room for you and the kids. Come and eat with us and stay with us." And we would. And the most refreshing thing during those experiences was when we would just sit around their dinner table and eat and laugh and not talk about the divorce at all. For a very brief moment in the chaos, Someone created an eye in the storm where we could just be normal for a second. And that was so healing to me each time that it happened. It all happened at dinner tables with the people at those tables. They weren't trying to fix me. They just let me be. And in doing so, each time that we had meals, a little bit more of me got fixed. People who just let me and my kids sit and eat with them and nothing else. It meant more to me than anything during that season of my life. Just to have a safe place that felt a little more like normal again. Now, when I look back on those days and all of their difficulties, it was those experiences at those dinner tables that kept me from completely imploding. I was this close to giving up, but I didn't. All because someone invited me and my kids to dinner. And in that, I saw then, and I still see today, Christ. Healing, saving, preserving, keeping me off the ledge. And maybe that's why this topic is a recurring theme in the life of Jesus, this topic of food, this topic of meals. Maybe the miracle isn't that Jesus converted a tax collector named Matthew into an apostle with a gospel named after him, but rather that Jesus would even sit down and eat with a tax collector at all. Maybe we think the miracle is the multiplication of the fish and the loaves, but perhaps the real miracle in those stories is the fact that Jesus even cared at all. That Jesus saw families going hungry and he was moved by compassion for them. And that's what made the magic happen, not something else. Maybe the miracle isn't Jesus saying at a table with his disciples, "This is my body and this is my blood given for you." But rather that Jesus is saying those very words, not just to his 11 friends, but also to the 12th, his betrayer. Maybe it's why the earliest symbol that we know of, used by the followers of Jesus, is not a cross, but in fact, a fish. A symbol of food, a symbol of life and sustenance, not a symbol of torture and death and sacrifice. And maybe, just maybe, if all of that is true, that is a place we need to get back to. Not to move forward to get back to. Maybe we don't need to learn anything new. Maybe it's already all right there in front of us on the page. Perhaps we just need to give it the same attention as we do all of the other parts of the story. As we move into a time of reflection now, where we get still and we get quiet and we receive the Eucharist together, I want to invite you to think about all these things. More importantly, what these things mean if you apply them to your life today. The importance of being with people, both friends and enemies, around tables. Let's think on those things for a few moments this morning as we get still as we get quiet and as we allow God to shape this message and whatever it means to us into our hearts today. Amen.